Life sometimes come at you fast. Tragedies make your life unravel. You feel like you wanna give up and stay knocked down. Even when your heart is shattered, you still got a life to live. You still got a life to live, so don't give up. We are beautiful miracles. We are beautiful miracles. We are beautiful miracles, so don't give up.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on my podcast, Beautiful Tragedy. If you like what you're hearing, would you please like, comment, share, and subscribe? And today I am joined by Teresa Foskey, and we met on an online community for podcasters. And when I was looking for more guests and different discussions, she reached out and said she wanted to share about the loss of her sister when she was younger. And so thank you for being here, Teresa.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So I would love it if you would share about your family and kind of talk a little bit about the loss of your sister when you were younger.
Okay, so I was about 3 so me and my sister are 6 years apart.
Okay.
And her name was Angel. And she was diagnosed along around the ages of 9-ish with aplastic anemia, which is a form of blood cancer. And they didn't make me. They did all the testing within the family to find out, because at that point, the only treatment was a bone marrow transplant. So everybody in the family was tested, and I came back as a perfect match. So at 4 years old, I was her bone marrow donor. And the transplant was a success for most part. And then it came back. So growing up as a sibling, I remember many, many trips to Johns Hopkins, because we lived in Maryland. We were 2 hours away from the hospital, Johns Hopkins. So I remember growing up many, many times, 2 or 3 times a week, in the back of a station wagon, back when the 80s, where there's no seatbelts, or laying in the back playing road bingo. That was just my life. I didn't know there was anything different.
Wow.
So there were many, many times we would go up 2 or 3 times a week, or she would be admitted. And there were some times during my childhood where she was healthy and she wasn't in the hospital. And we spent a lot of time together. Like during the summers, we would go to the YMCA, and, we were really close, even though we had another sibling, our younger brother, who was 4 years younger than me. So he was 10 when she passed away, and he was born prematurely. So he didn't stay during the summers. He would always go to a daycare. So he didn't really grow up with her the same way I did. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I remember a lot growing up was there were at least 4 times where we were told she wasn't going to make it. So all the family would go up to the hospital. We would say our goodbyes, and then she would rally, and then she would get better, and then she would come home. So growing up, this was like a cycle. It just happened so often that you kind of get complacent, and you don't think about anything happening. And I was also kept out of the loop. I knew, but I didn't know. Right. I knew she was sick. I knew we went to the hospital. I knew her doctors knew me. It was a friendship with the doctor. Sure. And I just didn't know how serious everything was. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward to 9th grade, freshman year. Well, actually, let me rewind. When she was 18, she moved out because she just wanted her independence like any other normal 18-year-old. Mm-hmm. So she moved out 2 streets away, ironically, from the house. She moved into an apartment building that was 2 streets up, and I could literally walk to her apartment and see her. Right. And so then she got sick again. And I remember that year, my grandparents were going to take all 3 of us kids to Disney, and she couldn't go because she was in the hospital. So it was my grandpa, my grandma, me, and my brother. We went down to Florida. We came back She was still in the hospital. But again, this was so normal to me that it really didn't seem out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. Freshman year comes. It was the third day of school. No, because Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because it was a Thursday. And I had heard through my parents that I thought she was coming home Friday and that she was going to move back home. And I was like, okay, great. Thursday comes, I go to school. It was right before lunchtime that I get a call to the office that somebody was coming to pick me up. And I didn't know that anybody was supposed to pick me up. So I go down to the office and there was this guy named Jay that picked me up. My grandparents owned a flower shop, a very successful flower shop in town. And it was, if I needed to get picked up, it would be either my dad or Jay that would come pick me up because they were the delivery drivers. Mm-hmm. So I remember he picked me up and he took me back to the flower shop instead of to the hospital. And there was something in me that said that wasn't right.
Okay.
Like, I don't understand. Mm-hmm. So I'm there at the flower shop. And the way the flower shop was set up was there was like the flower shop, then there was like a little corridor, and then there was the office where my grandfather did like all the paperwork and accounting stuff. And I remember walking, and I'm going to try not to cry.
Mm-hmm. It's okay if you need to.
I remember walking from the flower shop through the corridor into the office. And when my foot hit into the office, I fell to the ground and I started crying. And I was like, she's gone. Nobody had said anything to me. I didn't know anything.
You just knew.
I just knew. And then I started screaming and I was just like, why are we at the hospital? Why aren't we going to the hospital? And they were like, you have to wait for your grandfather. You have to wait for your grandfather. I was just like, because the flower shop was literally down the street from the hospital. Like I could walk out and see it. It was like maybe a half a mile. I was like, I'll just go. And they were like, no, you have to wait. So here I am, at 14, I really didn't know, but I knew. And I was just like, I need to get out of here. Like I started feeling claustrophobic. Here comes my grandfather. We get in the car, we get to the hospital. The elevator takes 400 forever. We get on the elevator, get to the 4th floor. I run out of the elevator and I turn the corner to go down the hallway to where her room was. And everybody was standing outside crying. And I just started crying and I was just like, what happened? What happened? And they were just like, she's gone. And I was like, what do you mean she's gone? Like, that's just not what I knew.
Right.
The cycle was she got sick. She was going to die. She got better. She came home. Like that was the cycle. So when it happened, it really like threw me.
I feel like even if someone's sick, there's just something about that shock of when they actually do die.
Yeah.
So, what do you remember about your parents after your sister died?
Well, I remember that my mom changed her work schedule because she was working day shift to working night shift. So then she started working 3 to 11. So I never saw her. I never saw her. She was gone when I got home from school and she didn't get up in the morning. So it was just like she removed herself from the situation. Sure. And my dad, he just slept all the time. He would work, but he would come home, fall asleep in the recliner watching MASH. My little brother would be like, what's for dinner? And I'm like, I don't know. We have to go wake up dad. And you would wake him up and he would be mad that you wake him up. And we're like, what's for dinner? And he would be like, I'll do it in a minute. And then I would end up having to make dinner. Yeah. And it was just, I feel like their pain and their grief was so overwhelming that they had blinders on and they couldn't see anybody else's grief. It was just theirs. They couldn't see mine, my brothers, my grandparents, each other's. And I get it.
Yes, I do. I absolutely do.
It's really hard.
And one of the things early on that propelled me to starting the foundation, Love Like Jackson, where we fund art, music, and play therapy for children whose siblings have died, is hearing that siblings are often called forgotten grievers. And, hearing the aspect of a young person whose sibling died, it's hard because as a parent, your attention's going to go on the child who is sick, but then remembering that there are other children there. Like, there were times that we would be looking at videos of Jackson and Ivan would say, "What about me?" And I'm like, "Oh gosh, yes, I need to look at pictures of you too." And it's like, to think that you need to be reminded of that seems very strange, but you can just get swallowed whole. And I would say to Ivan, we're sad that your brother died, but we're glad that you're still here. And seeing that look on his face, like we remembered him, we acknowledged him. It just gave him like so much peace. And what we're discussing is not meant at all to fault anyone on how they dealt with their grief, because there is no handbook on how to do this when you lose a child, and it was 20, was it 20 years ago?
She died in 1990.
So that is 32 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Back then, I mean,
they didn't know anything. There was no anything. They didn't, first of all, they didn't have family-centered care.
Yes.
The siblings weren't included in anything. I don't even remember there being like a sibling group at the hospice. I'm sure they had bereavement counseling back then, but I'm sure it was a lot different than what it is now.
Yeah. So it's like, I guess part of what I like to do is like, first of all, not fault anybody for how they dealt with it, because we're all just doing the best we can, but letting people know now that there are services available so that a sibling's grief can be acknowledged. And I had interviewed my son's play therapist, and she said she feels very strongly that a child's grief should not be ignored. And, I mean, I think
and it was hard. Like, I think, well, getting back to that, here locally where I am, we have something called community therapy or community bereavement, and it's free through the Hope or through the hospice that we have. You just contact them. It's a 24-hour number, and they immediately put you in contact with a bereavement therapist. And then they have groups for everyone, widowed, siblings, LGBT, like every pets, like every possible loss you can experience. They have a group and a therapist for you.
Wow.
Which is fantastic because, a lot of people can't afford therapy.
Absolutely. And that's with our foundation, we fund the play therapy, music or art therapy for children, because losing our son almost destroyed us financially. We were not prepared. My husband had a hard time working. You're all of a sudden having these expenses that you've never even thought about having. And so there was a local organization in our area that paid for the therapy for my son, and it made all the difference. It made it so that he was able to get the amount of therapy that he needed, because he developed debilitating anxiety. Like, he was terrified that I was going to leave and not come back, because that's what happened to his brother. I mean, he was 3.5. So obviously that's a big difference. But, so you were 14 when she died.
And she was 20.
Wow. So what were some of the things that you went through at that age? Because
interesting that you say about the anxiety of, losing people. For some reason, for the longest time, 20 was a really hard number for me because that's how old she was. So when my kids turned 20, because I have two that are over 20 now.
Right.
When for some reason, when I turned 20, it bothered me. Because at that point, I felt like I was living on borrowed time. Like, she should have been living.
Sure. Absolutely. My son will be 7 this year. And that was how old Jackson was when he died. And I already am nervous about it, because now anything beyond age 7 will be things that Jackson never got to experience. And I don't even know how I can prepare myself for that. It's just kind of
I don't think there's anything you can do.
No, trust me. I wish I would do anything possible, because the pain of losing a child is just so horrendous that I just wish that there was an easier way around it. But I've learned that I have to go through it. I can't go around it. I tried to avoid it. I tried to stay busy, and it just didn't work.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, like me and my brother didn't get along, and we still don't. And for the longest time, I was so mad at him because he didn't grieve the way that I grieved. You know, I was her sister. We were 6 years apart, but we spent so much time together.
Sure.
And I don't say that we were best friends because, you know, obviously we were siblings, so that doesn't happen all the time. Mm-hmm. But I spent the most time with her. So when she did die, my brother, who was 10 at the time, it didn't really faze him like that.
Right.
But because he didn't grow up like during the summers like I did with her.
Exactly. I was thinking about you donating her bone marrow. I mean, like at that age, like, was it even like, do you want to do this? Or was it
actually, I remember that we went into a room and her doctor asked me, she goes, your sister is sick and you can help her. Do you want to? And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
You know, from a 4-year-old's perspective, you know, if somebody needs help, you're going to help them, you know?
Right.
So I do remember that.
Wow. Was it painful for you, or was it like?
I don't remember that. My mom says that the next day, because when you're a bone marrow donor, they extract bone marrow from your hip because that is where the most marrow is. So they go across the back of your hip like 4 times with a very long needle and extract bone marrow. And usually, you know, it is painful. But my mom said the next day I just like hopped out of bed and was like, ouch, that hurts. And then I ran down to the playroom.
Wow.
I'm pretty resilient like that, I guess.
Sure. Well, and I mean, I think about like how impactful that must have been for you at that young of an age to like know that you got to save your sister's life at that time. It's hard to imagine.
I really understood it like that.
But do you now?
I do now.
Right.
But back then, I don't think, you know, when you grow up in it, it's all you know. So you don't really know any different. You just assume everybody does this.
Sure.
You know?
And our situation was not a typical situation. My son was admitted on a Sunday and died 6 days later. It just wasn't a typical situation,
right?
You know? So, you know, with a lot of the attention being on her, do you remember ever feeling left out or forgotten about?
Oh, all the time.
When she was sick?
All the time.
Yeah.
It always felt like, you know, it took a long, long, long time to come to terms with all that. And I did a lot, like going through college with my social work. We do a lot of therapy. Basically, you're doing a lot of learning, but you also practice on each other for different techniques and things. And I really came to terms with the fact that my parents did the best they could with what they had and what they knew. They didn't have anything else. They didn't know anything else. You know, this was in the 80s when, you know, science was not as advanced. And I remember that all of the kids on her ward that had aplastic anemia, they all died. And she was the last one. And I can't imagine, especially thinking about how old my parents would have been during that time. So my sister was their first child, and they were both 18 when she was born. Mm-hmm. So they would have been 38 when she died. So I can't imagine being in your 30s. You know, you have 3 kids. Your daughter is diagnosed with a fatal illness. You know, what do you do? Like, how do you hold your shit together? Exactly. Like, I can't imagine I could.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Wow. So are your parents still alive?
They are still alive and they are still married, although some days I wonder how. They've been married 52 years.
Right. Do you guys talk about your sister a lot? Is she part of the conversation? Really,
no. Not as much as I think maybe we should, because anytime we talk about her, my mom starts crying. And it's like, you don't want to go there. So you just don't talk about it. Yeah. And I know my parents have held on to everything that she's ever had. Wow. They still have everything. Like they just can't let go of that stuff. And
sure. I get that. I mean, I get that. One of the things our grief therapist says is doing grief therapy is like touching a hot stove.
Mm.
You know, and there's plenty of people that, and they're also kind of from that generation where you didn't talk about it, you know, and so I feel like one of the things that I'm doing personally with my own son, and then also with this podcast, is like, you know, we have to sort of break those generational traumas, you know, the things that people did back then because they didn't know any better, but now they're learning there's a better way and a different way, you know? So, did you have anyone to talk to when you were a teenager? I mean, about the death?
No, I at that point after she died, I became the strong one. I was the one that was holding everything together. While my parents were falling apart individually over here, I was the one having to keep everyone, my brother, alive and just trying to keep everything together. So there was never a time when I was just like, you know, woe is me and this sucks. And, you know, it just never happened. Fast forward though. Yeah. So she died when I was 14. 2 years later, I ended up giving birth to my first child. And that in itself could have been avoided, but it wasn't. And I mean, I love him and I'm so happy he's here. Of course. But I think that him being born maybe have pulled my parents out of the depression and out of the grief.
Yeah.
Because that became their main focus. Yeah. My son. It was like, whoo, well, I have someone else.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I don't know that it was like a purposeful, like I was seeking attention or anything like that. But I mean, it was probably a way that you got attention.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I got attention pregnant for sure.
Right.
But the minute he came out, it was like, goodbye.
Wow.
The whole attention went to him.
Oh, wow. So, yeah. So his birth kind of helped them see a little bit of joy.
I think
again,
so.
Maybe. Well,
I think so.
That's actually good in a way. I mean, you know.
It is good. I mean, it was good for them. It was really hard for me for a long time after that.
Yeah.
You know, for probably a good 5 years, but then everything came together in my life and everything worked out. But it was just, you know, it was tough because then you're now, okay, now I've got to figure out being a parent on top of everything else. So it was really, I struggled for a while.
Sure. And so your experience sort of shaped you in your career choice, would you say?
Yes, because I'm very passionate about family-centered care. Here, I live in Florida, and they actually have a lot of programs that are family-centered. And I think for me personally, from my past, I feel like whenever you have a child in a family that has any type of life-limiting illness, whether that means they're going to die tomorrow or 10 years from now, I think it's important that the whole family be involved so that there is no suddenness, you know, that the kids don't understand things. You can explain things age appropriately to children, no matter how old they are. But I think they need to stay in the conversation. So it's not such a shock to them.
Yeah.
And one of the things I did in college was they have a program here called Rainbow Trails. And I was in charge of redoing it as part of my final project. And one of the things I have is one of the things I did was a communication box for the families that throughout the week, you know, whenever you have an issue, you know, a problem, a concern, a feeling or whatever, you write it down and you put it in a box. And then one day a week, whatever day that one's, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever works for your family, you sit down and you open the box and you pull those things out and you talk about your feelings. You talk about what happened that week, whether, you know, the sibling had a doctor's appointment or whatever, so that everybody's feelings are heard, that they feel validated in their feelings, that they're not, you know, left out or feel like they're not involved. And so it gives you time to really communicate and be on the same page. And so that nobody has their feelings hurt. And it was really popular. Like families really liked that idea.
I love it. And I can see how it came from that not happening for you.
And every week is different.
Sure.
You know, with every kid, like whether it's elementary school, middle school, Lord have mercy, high school,
Right.
you know, you're going through all these feelings. And, you know, I think it's important that you communicate how you're feeling. And especially when you have a sibling or a child that has an illness, it's important if something changes medically.
Yeah.
That, you know, everybody understands where we are, what's going to happen, age appropriately, of course.
Right.
So that, you know, they understand, like, say if a sibling has to go in the hospital for a test or procedures or whatever, that they understand, you know, this is what's going to happen, but then also have a plan so that they feel like they're being taken care of. Yes. I was very blessed to have grandparents where I was with them most of the time. Mm-hmm. They pretty much raised me because my mom was usually in the hospital with my sister, and then my dad was working. So I was with my grandparents most of the time.
Yeah.
So I had that support system, and a lot of kids don't.
Yeah.
You know, they need to feel like they're being heard in this time.
Gosh, you're like answering the questions before I even ask them. Like I love it. But what would you say to a parent who has lost a child who has surviving siblings?
The most important thing is don't forget the other child. That, you know, you have to, as terrible as it sounds, you have to keep going. You can't stop where you are. Although the pain makes you want to not do anything, not get out of bed, not breathe, not shower, not do anything. Just take a deep breath and just put one foot in front of the other and just continue to move forward. And one of the things that I learned in school, and I've told many people about, it's called the grief box. And it's like, just think of it as square. And then there's a big circle. The circle fits the box. Like, it can't move. And your grief is a button in that box. So no matter what you do, when you're that big, you're going to hit that button. So you're going to be hurting all the time. I am not telling you that grief goes away, but what I am telling you is that you as the bubble will get a little smaller so that you're able to move around. You're still going to hit that button and it's still going to hurt. Yeah. But as the time goes by, you get smaller and you're able to function a little better.
Yeah.
So you're still going to hit that button, but it's not going to be as often. And for me personally, I know, like, here has been years and years and years now, decades since she died. And there are still times, like, I can watch anything on television, just start crying. Hear a song, start crying. It doesn't mean that the grief is gone. You just learn to remember the joy and you just keep going. You just take a deep breath and you just keep going.
You know, and I think about that grief box and, you know, yes, the ball gets smaller, but it's almost like the box can get bigger too, you know, in that you can learn things and you can open yourself up to it. Like, learning to live with the loss of your child is not something that just happens. It's something you have to learn how to do. And it is hard and it is painful, but it is possible to thrive again. You know, I was so worried that Ivan's development and all those kind of things would be, would stall. And it's very understandable why it would, because it's such a huge loss. And I believe that without the therapy that he got, that it would have, but I see him now and he's thriving, and he'll have different phases during life. You know, I mean, he's still only 6. So, I mean, there's a lot of years, unfortunately, that I still have to face all this, but he's getting equipped with tools and I'm getting equipped with tools. So for me, it doesn't feel as impossible as it felt in the beginning, because as a parent who lost a young child with a young sibling, it feels absolutely impossible to go on like that. And when I think about how difficult it is with help, I truly can't even fathom it without help. I mean, it's a pain like no other. And your perspective is really almost like the epitome of why I'm doing this show. because it really is, because it didn't get acknowledged the way you needed it to at that time. But, you know, through your work and you sharing your story is so important. It's so important. And I mean, honestly, it's getting me teared up just to see you talk about her. And it's been 30 years and it hurts the way it does.
It does still hurt, you know. Yeah. I wish she was here to see the kids.
Sure. There's a lot of things that she missed out on, and you missed out on. You know, you missed out on that relationship with your sister, and that's tough, you know. What would you say to a child who lost a sibling?
Oh, goodness. Talk to somebody. Yeah. You know, I did have my grandparents and I did have friends, sort of, you know, but they didn't understand. They'd never gone through this. They didn't know, you know, they just were there.
Yeah.
You know, I do think that it's important, especially if you have a child that has an illness that you know they are going to pass. I think it's important that you get them into therapy and you start talking about it.
Yeah.
You start talking about what's going to happen and what life's going to be like. And that doesn't mean that you're wishing for the death to happen. It just means that you are preparing yourself. You know, we never talked about it. So even though, you know, we knew she was sick and that eventually she would die, when she died, it was such a shock.
Yeah.
Because we had been through this, you know, this cycle for all of her life. So when it actually happened, you kind of get numb when they're in the hospital. You just go on autopilot. You're like, okay, well, yeah, she's sick.
Yeah.
She'll get better.
Yeah.
So to come out of that and be shocked that she actually died,
yeah,
we weren't prepared.
Well, it sounds like,
prepared.
Did your parents know, but they didn't want to tell you guys?
They didn't know.
Oh, they didn't.
Wow. The night before, interestingly enough, she called me the night before and we were arguing about this jean skirt. Lord, for God, I have this. It was a jean skirt outfit that she got from the mall. And it was a jacket and a skirt. And I wore it to school and she was mad at me. So we were fighting over the fact that I stole her jacket and her skirt. And we were fighting about it. And she called me. And being, you know, the stupid girl that I was on the phone with my boyfriend. I was 14. And she called me. She was just like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I'm not mad at you anymore. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm on the phone. Oh. And I hung up. And that was the last time I talked to her. Wow. So that took a really long time to come to terms with because I felt guilty.
Sure.
But I think she knew she was going to die. Because the next day is when she started coughing. And with aplastic anemia, it's kind of like hemophilia almost, like you have no clotting factor in your blood. So she started coughing and she just started coughing up blood and it didn't stop. And that's basically how she died.
Wow.
And the thing was, growing up, all my parents did, my mother especially, she was a caretaker. She fought to keep her child alive. Like she was like, anything you need to do, whatever it is. She had been on a ventilator many times. Like anything you need to do to keep my kid alive, that's what you need to do. Right. When my sister turned 18, she decided that she was going to sign a DNR. And that was the hardest thing for my parents to come to terms with. And I think about that as a parent and it just breaks my heart. But from her perspective, she was tired. You know, she had been a pincushion all of her life that she could remember. You know, she was been on a ventilator. She had been medicated. She had been, and I don't know how many different studies that they had, you know, they had tried everything. Yeah. And she was tired. And she was like, when it's my time to go, it's my time to go.
Wow.
So when this happened, you know, my mom's screaming, do something. You know, they could have possibly, we don't know, put her on a ventilator to let her lungs heal. We don't know if that would have worked. but it was her choice not to.
Yeah.
And I think that was really, really hard.
So you have to live with a lot of unanswered questions about, did we do the right thing? Did we not do the right thing? And that's terrible. That's terrible. And
I remember going through a stage, and I don't remember how old I was. I think I was probably like 20. And I had my own kids. And I was just like, I started thinking about it. I was like, why didn't they do this? Well, they could have done this, 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 and this. But again, at that point, it was like 10 years past the time she died. So obviously medicine has, grown and learned so much more than what they did back then, so I had to like stop myself and be like, you know what, I can't go back and change this.
Right.
I had nothing to do with her choice and what she wanted. And, it was just her time to go.
Yeah.
And I just have to deal with that.
Yeah. Acceptance is definitely a tough thing. And I know that I've questioned a lot, like, how will I know if I've accepted Jackson's death? And I think it's like, okay, well, I know he's not coming back, but what I've learned is that I can accept something, but that doesn't mean that I like it.
Oh yeah. Whew.
Yeah.
That's a tough lesson. And you learn that a lot.
Yes. I'm learning it over and over again. So if it was today's world and the therapy was available, would you have wanted it? Would you have taken it at age 14?
Oh, yeah. I would have liked to talk to other kids to hear what their story was and what they went through, and to not feel alone. And I really feel like when it comes to sibling being sick and death, I think there needs to be two kinds of therapy. I think there needs to be individual, and then I think there needs to be family, because, you made me feel, especially for me, I would feel more comfortable talking to a therapist first and processing my feelings before I talk to my parents about it.
Sure.
I think that's really important. And I think that for me, and I've said this before, I have said it in the past, the minute a child is diagnosed with anything, the first thing that the next referral should be to a social worker that can help them get in contact with things in their area, such as play therapy, music therapy, just therapy in general for families and for children.
Yeah.
And see if there's anything there that can help them process this. Because I know that the minute you go to the doctor's office, for your case, because it was such a short period of time, but in the traditional way that it normally happens, you go to the doctor's office and they're like, I'm sorry, your child has XYZ. Mm-hmm. The minute they say XYZ, you don't hear anything else. You don't hear anything else that doctor is saying. And you're trying to process, my child has whatever. And after that, when you get home and you're processing this, is when you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, what is this? What do I do next? And I think if you have a social worker to talk to, that they refer you to, that gets your file, knows your child's illness, then when they come and you go talk to them, they can help you, walk you through what the doctor is saying or what the doctor said, and help guide you to what the next steps are, and to help make sure that you're supported along the way for however long the journey is.
Yes. You bring a very important point to my mind in that, the child in the hospital, they'll probably be getting the services they need in the hospital. But then there's that sibling who's kind of like, I don't understand what's going on. Where's my sibling? Where's my mom? and the importance of getting them therapy, even probably beforehand, obviously you hope that the child survives, but like just realizing how important that sibling is during the process of the illness too. I mean, again, my situation was not a normal situation. We got on the job training as it was happening. Right. But, I feel like, as a parent, you're trying to juggle so many things, and, but just remembering that sibling, throughout the whole process, not just when they die, or, you know what I mean? Just
even if a sibling has a life limiting illness, like say it's not as severe as cancer, but like say they have cerebral palsy or some other life limiting illness that eventually will cause their death. the chances are that child is still going to outlive their parents. So their natural caregiver will be their sibling.
Yes.
And if you don't include them before that time comes, there's going to be this animosity and this, desire not to want to have to help them. But if you start at the very beginning, once that diagnosis comes, and you really include them in their care and their treatment, age appropriate, along the way, when it comes their time to have to care for them, they're going to do it out of love. They're going to do it out of wanting the best for them. And then they will know what happened all along, so that they can make sure that they get the best care. And a lot of parents don't do that, especially like autistic children. I have a nephew who's autistic, and he is 19, and obviously he will live at home because he's high functioning, but he will never be able to live on his own. And I've tried to explain that to my brother, like, you have to understand there's going to come a time when you're not going to be here. Ethan is healthy. He has autism, but he's healthy, and he's going to need someone to take care of him. But they've not set it up to be so that his sister will want to be that person.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's important that you do that.
Gosh, you just really have brought so many points that I just think that either people don't think about it, or they just don't. I don't know. I mean, I just think that people don't think about it. And I think it's important to bring these things to light. And so in the first season, I ended every episode with, "We're all just walking each other home." It's a quote by Ram Dass.
I love that.
And I love it too. And so this is the second season. And I chose my favorite quote by Maya Angelou, which is, we do the best we can until we know better. And then when we know better, we do better. And
I agree.
The things that you are saying absolutely can and will impact someone in their journey. And so I just am so thankful for your perspective. And again, it's hurting my heart to see,
I just don't want anybody to be forgotten. I think that's my main thing. I think that everybody deserves to be heard, and their feelings to be felt.
Yes.
And, everybody should feel validated and loved.
Yes. And I mean, I think more than anything, seeing the pain, even 32 years later, that in itself is impactful, because for me, I can't really fathom that far along in the journey. I'm only almost 3 years in, and it's, again, I don't know what's going to happen with my other son. I don't know. He may or may not have problems in life, but knowing that there's help available helps me to feel not so alone, and that, with help, you can get through this.
I'm just grateful that he has a mom as good as you are, that's willing to listen and go that extra mile and make him feel loved and heard.
Thank you. I don't know where it came from. I really don't quite understand. But I'm just really, really thankful that you took the time to come and talk and to share about your sister. And
thank you.
I just really think that what you've said will really, really be impactful for people. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.